Hi, this is Erin, and for our session tonight, I'd like to talk about learning spaces, both physical and virtual.
If you should have the opportunity to remodel, renovate, or even build a brand new school library, there's several things that you'd want to do in preparation for that. One is to talk with the architects working on the design. Oftentimes, architects have grand visions for the school library, but they're not really familiar with the functionality of the school library and how the space is used. So you would want to be able to communicate that to the architects, and definitely see drawings as they are works in progress, so you can put in your input and ideas for what will be the most usable for you and your learning community within the school library. So there are a lot of things that you need to do in terms of planning. When you're thinking about your school library and planning for redesign or renovation, or even how to use your learning space, really think about what activities would take place within your facility. Are you going to have small group activities? Are you going to need some production space? All of the different things that might happen there, both in the present and looking towards the future. Think about the guidelines and standards that we get from our state and national organizations. For example, in Linking for Learning, there is a section about facilities in terms of the rubric and how to score your library that we've looked at in class. Definitely take the advantage of touring other facilities. Go to other schools and take a visit. You can look online at pictures, but until you get in some other spaces and talk to the librarians that are using those spaces, you really get some great insights in what's useful and what's not so useful. You definitely want to include the voices of your stakeholders. So ask your students, ask your faculty, ask administration what they would want to see in the ideal school library and how they envision using the library. To avoid wasting your time, really know your project parameters before you get into all the planning. So know what your budget is going to look like. Have an idea of your timeline. How long do you have for the project to get finished? And really understand the scope of the project. Are you going to be remodeling the whole space, or are you just going to add a reading nook or something like that? Having a good idea of what the project will consist of before you get started will maximize your efforts. And then finally, as I just mentioned, really make sure that you meet with that architect if there is one involved in your project, and work on giving modification suggestions as you see the works in progress. Some other things you need to think about if you are working on looking at your library and the library design. Think about what will make it a usable and useful space for you and your users. Think about supervision. If you are a staff of one, you do not want to get in a situation where you have a 2-level library, because supervision will be virtually impossible. You want to make sure that your shelving is placed strategically in the room. You don't want tall stacks in the middle of the room. That will make it really difficult to have good, clean sight lines to supervise. So think about those management kind of constraints that you might face. Think about traffic flow into and out of the library to make a smooth transition throughout the school day and to be least disruptive to your users. Think about how people will access your library. Definitely give yourself room to grow. If you open the doors to a brand new library and your shelves are packed, that's not giving yourself room to grow. There's no way that you can continue to grow and thrive your collection, even with some of the weeding considerations we talked about earlier. Think about your tech planning for the future. What kind of infrastructure, what other things are needed to support technology and the use of technology in your library? Think about ideal workspaces. What kind of layout do you want for your library? What kind of spaces do you want for people to work? Do you need presentation areas? Do you need interactive boards? Do you need kind of write-on walls? Do you need study rooms? Think about all the different configurations you could have within your space and what will be most useful to your community. Think about areas for display and having wall space where you could hang student work, hang materials of books and other things that you would like to display. Think about storage. In the school libraries, we have a lot of stuff to store, particularly equipment or other things you might not want available or accessible or even viewable by the general public in your library. Kind of Think of spaces that you're going to need behind the scenes. What about furnishings? You're going to need cozy spaces to read, or you're going to need chairs, tables. What kinds of furnishings will best meet the needs of your students? And how are you going to balance cost and durability, things like that? And probably most importantly, think about the overall environment you want to have created in your library. Think about your lighting, your decor, your color scheme. What kind of vibe do you want to send out to the students and the staff of your school? And that will send a message about what kind of place your library is and what kind of place it should serve within the school community. Again, I mentioned how important the users' voices are in terms of planning facilities, and that is probably a sentiment that's been echoed in some of the other things that you've watched for this session today. But Doug Johnson has this facilities planning survey. The whole survey is linked on the wiki page for tonight's session. But it just gives a really nice model of questions that you should think about asking your users as you're contemplating changing things up in your library, and to really elicit their needs for the space. So we'll take a really quick activity break. Think about the design of your ideal library and what features would it include and what you would include. And I'm just taking a second to think about, in the course of a day, what my library is used for. And we have everything from faculty meetings to parent meetings to classes. I think I shared with you guys that it's not uncommon for 2 to 3 classes to be using the library at the same time. We have presentation spaces, we have technology use, we have all different types of uses, and I'm just thinking kids coming in for recess to do homework. So I need to try to accommodate all of those things in the library usage. So the definition of the Learning Commons is having this transformative way to look at libraries and computer labs, looking at our virtual spaces, the physical space, kind of having an experimental learning center, and a common space for people to gather, share, and connect ideas. If you want more information about Learning Commons and want to see some examples of school Learning Commons in action, I put on the website for this effort here, and there's lots of resources there to dig around in. And still further, you can listen to a webinar with David Lurcher. He gave a webinar for ISLMA this past fall, and about a year ago he did one for the TL Virtual Cafe. So you can go to the archive and listen to the hour-long talk and some of the resources that he shared about the Learning Commons movement. I'd just like to give you a quick plug with the TL Cafe, Virtual Cafe. It's TL, Teacher Librarian. It is a group of, I guess, started by a group of school librarians from around the country. There's certainly some thought leaders in our field that are part of this group, and every month they put on a free webinar. And all of them are archived, so if you just search for TL Virtual Cafe, it will pop you to the website, and there you can see the archives. You can find out when the current events are going to be happening. It's a great chance to connect with your professional learning network, and also just get some really valuable free professional development. I want to talk a little bit about virtual libraries. We've talked about our physical presence, and I think just as important as the physical presence is your virtual representation. Oftentimes when students need to use the school library, it's after hours, and so we have to figure out a way to be present for our students even beyond the school day. Anywhere, anytime, 24/7, they should be able to access some of the resources that we have to offer. So we really need to be thoughtful about what's the most effective use of our resources, what's the most impactful way that we can provide these web services, what it would look like, where should it be, and what works best for our school population. Joyce Valenza is a library media specialist at Springfield Township High School in Pennsylvania, and she did her dissertation work on developing a taxonomy for school library websites, looking at what was the most effective pieces of information to include on school library websites. And so as part of her work, she talked about shifting her own perspective of what should be included within her school library website. And her goals recently have been to create a more interactive presence, to have a space where she can easily create instruction and collaboration with colleagues and learners, to be able to store and archive and display student work, student art, student life, and to create some interface that's easily editable, that you can work on the fly, that you don't have to upload files. And because of some of the changes in technology, this is becoming easier and easier to do. She really believes in modeling the new tools and practicing with them and sharing them with students and teachers, and to let teachers and students participate in that learning, so that everybody's got this attitude of play when adapting with these new technologies, that there's not just one, the idea there's not just one expert, but everybody has the ability to learn and to share, and that way everyone gets better. So this is a picture of Joyce's former website. It's a really interesting, kind of different than a lot of other school library websites. And the idea is that this is largely before many of the Web 2.0 tools came along. The idea is that it is a model or a manifestation of the physical library in a virtual realm, so that in theory, students could transfer the knowledge that they had about where things were located in a physical library and then look at this website and figure out pretty easily where they would be located in this virtual space. So it's the idea of transferring that knowledge from one environment to the other. And using all of the different tools that are offered and having access to the library 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we're going to look at some other school library websites. In fact, that's going to be a task that you have. So to think about this model, which was really pretty groundbreaking at the time, and think about how that compares to what else you look at. And then this is Joyce's look at her rebooted website. So I looked today, and this is what the website looks like now. And you'll see that it's hosted on a wiki, so it's a Wikispaces wiki, so it's very easy and adaptable to work on the fly. The front image is a Glogster, and you notice that that's superimposed on a picture of the actual entrance to the to the physical library. And then on the right side of the page, and much further down than you can see here, there's all kinds of widgets and apps and other things that students could get to get to more content. So this is a very different look than the earlier version of the library website, and so we can decide whether what we think is the best representation of the school library online and what would be the most useful for users. And obviously, when designing your school library website, you'd be well served to get student input, faculty input, and really even observe how they're using the website and what things are most user-friendly.